Namaste everyone. I, Shivakumar, student of IIT Madras, on behalf of Vande Mataram family, extend a hearty welcome to our chief guest, Professor Meenakshi Jain ji, members of the faculty, students, and distinguished audience. Team Vande Mataram offers deep gratitude to the frontline workers battling the COVID-19 pandemic. We wish that the world soon recovers from this challenge. We pay tribute to our 20 brave soldiers who lost their lives in protecting the nation in the Galwan Valley, Ladakh. Our Vande Mataram Forum aims to conduct events that introduce and sensitize the students' community about India's rich cultural, economic, socio-political, scientific, and technological heritage, with its relevance today and thoughts about the roadmap ahead. In the year 2017, we started off with an annual lecture series in the memory of Sri Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay ji, one of the greatest poets and a nationalist of the 19th century. Today, on this 182nd birth anniversary, it is a great pleasure to have Dr. Meenakshi Jain ji with us to deliver this memorial lecture on the topic Rediscovering India through the gaze of foreigners, travelers, and Orientalists. This memorial lecture is one of the most important lectures for us in every academic year. We take this as an opportunity to pay our obeisance to our inspiration, Sri Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, who gave us the divine song Vande Mataram, which plays a pivotal role in the growth of Indian nationalism and independence movement. The shloka from Ramayana, Janani Janma Bhumischa Swargatapi Ghariyasi, which means that mother and motherland are superior to heaven. And this is the philosophy which has kept us going ahead the last 5 years in this institute and strengthens our national consciousness. We have been proudly following the tradition of singing our national song Vande Mataram in the very beginning of every lecture. Now I request Sudha Jain ji to sing our national song Vande Mataram.
Thank you, Shiva. Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam, Sufalam, Malayaj Sheetalam, Shasya Shamala Mataram, Vande Mataram, Shubhra Jyotsnam Pulakit Yamini, Pullak Sumit Drumadal Shobhini, Suhasini, Sumadhur Bhashini, Sukhdam Varadam Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram.
Thank you very much, Sudha Jain ji. Now I take the privilege to briefly introduce our chief guest, Dr. Meenakshi Jain. Dr. Meenakshi Jain is a noted historian of medieval and colonial India. She is a fellow of Nehru Memorial Museum and Library and a former member of the Governing Council of Indian Council of Historical Research. She is currently a senior fellow of the Indian Council of Social Science Research. For her distinguished work in the field of literature and education, Dr. Meenakshi Jain has been conferred with Padma Shri by the Government of India this year. Her area of research includes cultural and religious developments in medieval and early modern India. Her deeply researched books have dealt with historical issues of national importance like the flight of deities and rebirth of temples, the battle for Rama, chaos of the temple at Ayodhya, and the most famous book, Sati, Evangelicals, Baptist Missionaries, and the Changing Colonial Discourse, which is considered as the most scholarly work on the topic of Sati in India. This talk will be followed by a brief question-answer session. I request all of you to raise the questions in the comment section in our YouTube channel. Now I request Dr. Meenakshi Jain ji to deliver her much-awaited talk. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Namaskar. Vande Mataram Forum, IIT Chennai. I was so looking forward to meeting you people in person but that was not to be. I'm deeply honored by this invitation to deliver the Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture. We are all aware of the pivotal position Bankim Chandra occupies in the history of nationalist thought and Indian literature. Like so many of his compatriots, Bankim Chattopadhyay had a deep affinity with the spiritual heritage of this land. Patriotism for him, love for the land, that was the highest religion. Patriotism was the running theme of his works. In 1907, Shri Aurobindo wrote an essay, Rishi Bankim Chandra. In that, he said that Bankim described the religion of patriotism for us. He gave us the vision of our mother. It was not until the motherland, I'm just quoting Shri Aurobindo, he gave us a vision of our mother. It is not till the motherland reveals herself to the eye of the mind as something more than a stretch of land or a mass of individuals. It is not until she takes shape as a divine and maternal power in a form of beauty that can dominate the mind and seize the heart, that petty fears and vanish in an all-absorbing passion for our mother and her service, and patriotism that works miracles and saves doomed nations is born. As was pointed out at the beginning, Shri Aurobindo translated Bankim Chandra's famous song Vande Mataram into English. One more thing that I would like to mention about Bankim Chandra, he was very conscious and aware of the importance of history in the creation of a nation. He said again and again that a nation exists in its history, and he depends of Indians about their past and its falsification by foreign historians. He had a strong nationalistic consciousness among Indians. For a self-aware people, he argued, knowledge of their past is vital. He urged his compatriots to reclaim their history, which was a history of power, Bahupal. I join you all in paying homage to this great son of our country. I'd now like to come to the topic of my talk today, that is India through the gaze of foreign travelers and Orientalists. Some years ago, I prepared accounts of India. That is when I became aware of the magnitude of work that has been done on India right from very early times. And I was amazed at the richness of this literature, which I think is worthy of study by all of us. And what struck me was that how much of that life which they have portrayed we continue to see around us till today. Because the material is so vast, I can possibly not do justice to it. So I'll just give you snippets of some of the writings which may interest you. I also want to say that a lot of this material has not yet been translated into English. It's still there in many European languages, and which it still awaits translation. So I will divide my talk into three sections: ancient, medieval, and modern, so that we are very clear about which period we are discussing and what are the important authors or travelers that we should be aware of. So I will begin with the ancient period, and it is very interesting that the first traveler of importance that is said to have come to India is Pythagoras. Pythagoras lived in the 6th, 5th century BC, and he was a great philosopher, and his teachings were subsequently to influence Plato, Aristotle, and Western philosophy in general. You're all aware of the theorem that is associated with his name. But for me, what is of great interest is that he is associated with the teaching of metempsychosis, that is, transmigration of soul. This is a belief that the soul is immortal, and on the death of a person, it finds a new body. Now, why is this so interesting? Because you will appreciate that this is such an important thought in the Hindu philosophy, and it has survived and thrived down the millennia. Even today, you will not find, perhaps you will not find anyone who's not aware or not conscious of this theory of the soul being immortal and being taking on another body on the death of one person. So it's very interesting that Pythagoras in the 6th, 5th century BC should be also teaching this doctrine. There is no conclusive proof that he came to India, but it is regarded as a very distinct possibility. Now, there is definite evidence of the next important person to visit India. He's also a Greek. His name is Alexander. You would all have heard of him. He was a student of Aristotle, and he was among the greatest conquerors in the ancient world. Alexander was very conscious that he was creating a place for himself in history, and that is why when he traveled with an entourage of scholars, historians who would record his achievements for posterity. And so we have many accounts of his time. One of the most important accounts that we have is by Nearchus. Nearchus was the naval commander of Alexander, and he is celebrated for an exploratory voyage that he undertook on the Indus River through the Persian Gulf, ending at the mouth of the Tigris River. Nearchus's original account has unfortunately been lost, but a large part of it is preserved in the writings of the Greek historian Arrian. And many other Greek and Roman historians have written about Alexander's foray into India. Now, when Alexander reached Taxila, he was welcomed by the ruler Ambi, who ruled the area from the Indus to the Jhelum. Ambi was wanting an ally against his enemy Porus, who ruled the region between Jhelum and Chenab rivers. Now, the Greek historians, they write with great respect about Porus. They say he was physically a very, very impressive figure, and he continued to fight Alexander even when the odds had turned against him. Now, there's certain very interesting accounts that we have of Alexander's entry into India. There is a Roman historian, his name is Quintus Curtius. He wrote a book, Histories of Alexander the Great. And in this book, he says that when the army of Porus was marching against Alexander, they carried an image of their god Krishna before them. Because carrying that image was the strongest incentive for the soldiers of Porus's army to fight with as much courage as they can, because they have to make sure that the deity is also protected. So this account is the first foreign account that mentions an image of Krishna being carried in front of Porus's army. That is very, very interesting. Then we have all these Greek historians mention Alexander's account with a group of people whom they call gymnosophists. Now, who are these gymnosophists? They are described as ascetic philosophers. And we know that naked philosophers or ascetic philosophers have been such an important part of the Indian spiritual and cultural scene over the millennia. Now, why does Alexander meet these people? Actually, Alexander suspects that they have instigated an Indian prince, Tabaz, to revolt against his army and to create problems for his army. So this is a very fascinating incident, that a group of gymnosophists are instigating an Indian prince to revolt against Alexander. It's very fascinating. I don't want to draw more conclusions, but this is a fact that I thought I would bring before you. Now, Plutarch, in his Life of Alexander, he says that Alexander ordered these gymnosophists to be produced before him, and a group of 10 came. So he asked the leader of that group, "Why did you try to incite a revolt against him?" And the leader says, "Because we wanted this Indian prince to live nobly and to die nobly." So that is also speaks a lot. Now, there is a third point that I want to make in connection with Alexander's visit to India. This is an account that has been preserved in the Greek accounts of India. These Greek accounts say Alexander caused the whole country to be described by men well acquainted with it. This is the quote. He caused the whole country to be described by men well acquainted with it. Now, how do we explain this? According to scholars, Alexander was actually lost. He thought that the land of 5 rivers was Upper Egypt, and he thought that it would eventually lead to the Nile River and then back to the Mediterranean. But the men he met in Punjab, they knew otherwise. So Alexander asked them to describe this country. Now, the information that the Indians gave him about their land has been preserved in the writings of another ancient historian, Strabo. And it is surprising that information is available to us because Strabo's writings are available to us. What is absolutely surprising is how accurately they have described this subcontinent, because their description is almost the size of the subcontinent that we know in later times. So Indians at that early age had such an accurate idea of the extent of their country is also very interesting. And one more thing, that it is in the accounts of Greek historians who that we have the first recorded instance of Sati described. So that is something that I can discuss later in this, if there's a question in the, from the audience. But the first recorded instance of Sati is also related to the accounts. It's narrated in the accounts of the Greeks. And Alexander, during his stay in India, is believed to have met Chandragupta Maurya, the future founder of the Mauryan Empire. After meeting Alexander, Chandragupta realized the importance of a huge army and a disciplined army. So this is another account that we have. Now, what is interesting is that we have so many Greek accounts of Alexander's incursions to India, but it is not mentioned in any Indian account. So how do we explain it? Why is Alexander's incursion into India not mentioned in any Indian account? Was it because it was regarded as an insignificant event? It had no relevance to the history of India? That is the question that I leave it for you to ponder over. The next account that we have of India is by another Greek. You may have heard of him. His name is Megasthenes. Megasthenes was the Greek ambassador to the court of Chandragupta Maurya. Chandragupta Maurya, I mentioned earlier that he had met Alexander when Alexander had invaded India. So Chandragupta Maurya has a Greek ambassador at his court. His name is Megasthenes, and Megasthenes lived in India between 302 and 288 BC. His work, Indica, has been lost, but large parts of it have been preserved in the writings, in the histories of other historians. Now, what is the importance of Chandragupta, of Megasthenes' account? He writes in detail about the famous city of Patliputra, its massive fortifications, the palace of the king. And for us, it's very important that he says Krishna is worshipped and the towns of Mathura and Gokul are with his followers. So this is the second reference that we get to antiquity of Krishna. And he mentions that the kingdom of the Pandyas in the south, it is connected with the ruling family of Mathura. So are we to conclude that there was a migration from Mathura to the deep south in this period? Megasthenes also says that the Pandya kingdom was a queendom. It only had women rulers, queens, queendom. It did not have a male ruler. And he says that this Pandya kingdom was named after the daughter of Lord Krishna, who established the kingdom over there. So these are very fascinating accounts, because if it was not for these foreign accounts, we would not get this information, which is not available in any other source. Now, Megasthenes is the first person to provide a detailed account of the social structure of Indian society. He says that the Indians are divided into 7 categories according to the profession they follow. The smallest in number, but the most revered and honored are the wise men, sophists. Then he says that the most numerous are the farmers. And after them, he mentions soldiers, herders, artisans, shopkeepers, overseers, and the 7th class are those who deliberated with the king on matters of public affairs. So these are some of the interesting accounts that have survived from Megasthenes' book Indica. But for me, the most important and the most fascinating Greek account, it's not an account, it's an inscription. So this is called the Heliodorus. Heliodorus was the Greek ambassador, and he came to India in the 2nd century BC. He erected a column which is called Garud Dhwaj in Vidisha, and that column survives till today. So in the 2nd century BC, we have another foreign account. It's not an account as such, but it is an inscription by a Greek, Heliodorus. And this inscription is the earliest epigraphic evidence that we have of the worship of Vasudev Krishna. This inscription is very important for several reasons. The inscription is in 2 parts. The first part gives the details of the king whom he is representing, where he has come from, and what is the year. So he has come from Taxila. He is a Greek ambassador to an Indian king whose name is also given. The second part of the inscription is absolutely fascinating because it is almost verbatim reproduction of a verse from the Stri Parv of the Mahabharata. Now, this is very intriguing. Heliodorus, who's coming from Taxila, how is he quoting a verse from the Mahabharata? Are we to conclude that he was familiar with the Mahabharata before he came to India? The answer to this question is found in the Mahabharata itself. The Mahabharata clearly says that the composer of the Mahabharata, Vyas, ordered that Mahabharata should be first recited in Taxila, and the assembly of listeners heard the Mahabharata first recited in Taxila, and from there they took it to their various regions. So it's a very interesting case of an inscription matching what an ancient text is saying. So these are some of the very, very interesting snippets that we have got of our cultural heritage from these foreign accounts. And foreign traveler, Heliodorus is not an account, it's an inscription, but it's a person who has come from Taxila and is an ambassador to the Greek king. Now, there is the next evidence that I want to give you is actually not an account, but it concerns an Indo-Greek ruler in India. You know, for some periods, parts of northwestern India were ruled by Indo-Greeks, Shakas, Kushanas, foreign dynasties. So among them, I would like to mention the Indo-Greek ruler. His name is Menander. He ruled the northwestern parts of India in 165 BC. I mention him because he is described in his column coins as a follower of Dharma. This is interesting. And a Dharma Chakra is depicted on his coins. The invocation of the word Dharma by an Indo-Greek ruler I found very significant. Now, what I want to say about King Menander is that he had a very long debate with a Buddhist scholar, Nag Sen. And he asked him many, many questions. And as a result of those questions and Nag Sen's answers, it is said King Menander became a Buddhist. So this conversation between Menander and Nag Sen is recorded in a book, Milind Pano, The Questions of King Milinda. So this is very interesting. And at Bharut is a very ancient Buddhist site. And over there is a frieze. It depicts a man and in Indo-Greek costume, and scholars say that it's actually a portrait of King Menander. So, coming back to foreign accounts, in the early Common Era, we have a very important Greek philosopher visiting India. And of course, for that also, we have definite evidence. So this is Apollonius of Tyana. Apollonius of Tyana was a follower of the teachings of Pythagoras. And he also taught the theory of reincarnation. Now he visited Takshila. He visited a temple which was possibly a Zoroastrian place of worship. But he says that on one of the walls of the temple, there were bronze tablets which were fastened on the wall, and they depicted the fight of Porus and Alexander and the battle scenes. That also is, that book of his has survived. It is, the account of his travel to India, to Taxila, has survived. And it's a very, very helpful piece of literature which helps us to understand the history of that period. And there are two other accounts that I would like to mention that talk about trade between India and parts of the Western world. The Periplus of the Aetherian Sea. It's an anonymous work in Greek, said to have been written in the 1st century Common Era and completed by others in the 3rd century. It mentions the ports in Broach in Gujarat, Palitana in Maharashtra, and talks about the internal struggles between various dynasties like the Satavahana dynasty and the Western Kshatraps, and gives us very interesting information. And I would also like to mention Ptolemy and his geography. So these are also very helpful in reconstructing and understanding India. Now I want to move on to Chinese accounts. The Chinese were very attracted to India because of the teachings of Buddhism. They came to India in large numbers to learn about Buddhism, to collect Buddhist texts. And there were very many Chinese who came. Some of the inscriptions can be seen at Bodh Gaya. The accounts of most, unfortunately, have been lost. But 3 important Chinese travelers, their accounts have survived. You would probably be familiar with their names. Fahin was the first to arrive, and he came in the early 5th century, traveling on foot from China. He visited many sacred sites associated with Buddhism, including Lumbini, the birthplace of Lord Buddha. He described Takshila, Patliputra, Mathura, and Kanauj, and he took back many Buddhist texts. Now, the person that interests me is the next traveler, Yun Sang. Yun Sang, on the way to India, uh, left a detailed account of the Buddhist sites that he saw in Afghanistan. And he talks about the famous Bamiyan Buddhas. We've all heard of the Bamiyan Buddhas, which were blown up about a decade ago, but he describes the Bamiyan Buddhas, and he describes a stupa which had been built 4 centuries earlier by the Kushan king Kanishk. He describes that stupa in great detail, and you will be surprised to note that Yun Sang's account was used by archaeologists in the early 20th century to excavate that stupa because it helped them to determine where that stupa would be. So this account was very helpful to archaeologists. Hyun Sang also says that he went to the birthplace of the great Sanskrit grammarian Panini. And he says that in the village of Panini, I find that a statue has been erected in honor of the great son of this village. So that's very interesting. Hyun Sang comes to India, he stays in Kashmir for some time and studies there, and he also studies in Nalanda. Now, there are two things about his account that I want to specify. It's a very long account. I cannot get into it, but I just want to mention two things. Yun Sang talks about a great congregation of pilgrims at Prayag. So are we to understand that he is describing a kumbh at Prayag? Very interesting. And the second thing that interests me is that he, on his way to India, he went to the Sun Temple in Multan. And he described the image and the grandeur of that temple. Yun Sang's account of the Sun Temple in Multan is the last eyewitness account that we have of that temple before it was devastated, desecrated by the Arab forces that entered Sindh. It Singh is the last Chinese traveler. He was a student at Nalanda University. Several Koreans also visited, and they wrote about the political, religious, and cultural traditions. And many of them also visited South India, but I do not have the time to get into that. Now I'll quickly switch to the next period, that is the medieval period. After the Chinese travelers, India has a new kind of visitors from the 7th century. In the 7th century, the world scene was greatly changed with the expansion of the Arabs and Turks and the birth of Islam. I should put it the other way around. The world scene greatly changed with the rise of Islam and the attendant era of Arab and Turkish expansion. So within 100 years of the death of Prophet Muhammad, the Arabs had established a world empire. They had reached Spain and they had come till the doors of Al-Hind. Syria, Iran, Iraq, all these ancient civilizations had been worsted by the Arab and Turkish armies. Now, as a result of these conquests, the Arabs controlled the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. They dominated all the trade routes and the caravan routes. And Europe's links with India were cut, There was no direct link between India and Europe until several centuries later, Vasco da Gama found a new route to India. So, from this period, we have the earliest travelers are Arab geographers and merchants. And among the earliest accounts we have is of the merchant Suleiman, who wrote in around 851 Common Era. At this time, India was at the peak of her intellectual and cultural attainments. And another early traveler, Masudi, he said that hikmah means wisdom. He said hikmah came from India. Now, these early Arabs, they transmitted knowledge of Indian numerals, mathematics, philosophy, logic, mysticism, statecraft, medicine, so much more, astronomy, astrology to the outside world. Even games like chess and Chaucer were taken from India to the wider world. But this tradition of acceptance or receptivity to Indian knowledge ended with Al-Biruni in the 11th century. And after that, we find a much less appreciative attitude towards Indian attainments. In fact, we can say we find hostility towards Indian attainments. Because after Al-Biruni, most of the Persian historians, they're only interested in the world of the court and the life of the Sultan. They're not interested in the world outside the court. Now, the early Arabs, when they came to India, there were three very powerful dynasties ruling in the country. These were the Palas, the Gurja Pratiharas, and the Rashtrakutas. So, according to Arab accounts, the Pala ruler Dharampal possessed the largest armed force in the country, and he was accompanied by as many as 15,000 elephants when he 50,000 elephants when he went on war, 50,000, and the number of washermen in his army was 15,000. I don't know how much we can accept at face value. The figures seem astounding. But the Arabs also say that in the Pala kingdom, a cloth was woven that was so fine that it could pass through a ring. They describe the Gurja Pratiharas as the enemies of Islam par excellence. And they said that they possess a cavalry unrivaled by any other king of India. And they describe the Rashtrakutas as the greatest kings of Al-Hind and the fourth greatest monarchs of the world. And there's an interesting account that I would like to share with you. It's on women of royalty. It is written by a person, Abu Zaidul Hasan, in 950. He was from, I think, Khorasan. And he wrote that in India, royal women are not veiled. Most Indian princes, when they hold court, they allow their women to be seen by men who attend the court, whether it is native men or foreigners. No veil, parda, is ever used to conceal them from the eyes of the visitor. Now, coming to a little later period, that is the 11th century onwards, there are lots and lots of accounts in Persian. It's not possible to discuss all of them in the course of a small talk. But I would like to mention the most important writer of this period. His name is Al-Biruni. Al-Biruni came to India with Mahmud Ghaznavi. He stayed in Punjab for a long time, learned Sanskrit. He wanted to understand Indian philosophy, Indian religion, Indian science, Indian astronomy, and he has written a book, Al Hind, which is the most comprehensive account of Indian culture, civilization, education. There was no aspect of Indian uh, cultural scene that he did not cover. It's the most comprehensive account. And what does he write? Just one or two things that I want to tell you. He writes that the Indians have very little dispute among themselves on matters of theology. There's great agreement between them on matters of theology. There's hardly any theological disputes. And he says that they all believe in the theory of transmigration of souls. And he says that the ancient Greeks agreed with this view. So he is perceptive enough to note that this belief in the theory of transmigration is a deep rooted belief in India and that it was once also shared by the ancient Greeks. That's very, very significant. He notes the wide prevalence of image worship. He writes a lot, and he writes about caste, and he says though you know, there are four varnas, and whatever they all live in the same villages and towns. The castes live in the same villages and towns. He writes about the system of writing in great detail, how the bark of a tree, it is used, it is oiled, and it is prepared for writing. He also writes about the image of Ma Sharda in Kashmir. So this is very, very interesting. And he describes this image of Ma Sharda, which shows that at that time, the temple was still under active worship. Because he describes the distance, the time it takes to travel to that temple. The other traveler I thought I would like to mention, not so well known among non-historians, is Gardisi. And why I mention Gardisi is because he gives us an eyewitness account of the sacred city of Ujjain, which we all know is still revered and a site and a place where lakhs of people go to worship at the Mahakaleshwar temple. I will also, okay, now I will just tell you that at this time, Muslim rule is established in North India with the founding of the Delhi Sultanate. That is the first time that a part of India comes under Muslim rule. And we have a lot of travelers who come from outside. But I would like to mention only one, and that is Ibn Battuta. I will mention him for two reasons. First, because Ibn Battuta actually witnesses an incident of Sati, which he writes about. We can take that up during questions if you like. But more important, Ibn Battuta actually goes to Khajuraho. And he talks about the desecration of the temples at Khajuraho. And he says, though the temples have been desecrated, there is a group of yogis who lives in that temple, in those temples, and, does the sacred rituals or whatever they have to do. So till now, I have mainly focused on North India. I'd just like to briefly tell you what's happening in the South. After the Rashtrakutas, whom I had mentioned earlier, we had the great Chola dynasty. You've all heard of the great rulers of the Chola dynasty, that is Raja and Rajendra Chola. And then after that, In 1336, we have the establishment of the Vijayanagar Empire. The Vijayanagar Empire is established to stop the attacks from North India. You would all be aware of that. And many foreign travelers are attracted to Vijayanagar. They come here. I can just mention some of them: Tom Pyrus, Varthema, and many others. And some of them, like Abdul Razak, actually get an audience with the ruler of Vijayanagar, which they describe about in detail. There is a Portuguese traveler. His name is Duarte Barbosa. He came in the first half of the 16th century, and I just want to mention one part of his account. He says that the Vijayanagar king had in his palace more than 4,000 women. Some of them were wrestlers, others were astrologers, some kept accounts that were incurred in the palace, and some had the duty to write detailed accounts of what was happening in the kingdom. And they were also, wrestlers, bodyguards, etc. We have the most detailed accounts by two Portuguese of the Vijayanagar kingdom, Nunes and Pais. And both their accounts are very interesting because they write copiously on the 9-day Dussehra festival that is celebrated with such pomp and grandeur by the Vijayanagar kings. They say that the military might that is on display over there on those 9 days, which are dedicated to the worship of Durga, they say it is dazzling. And the kind of wealth that is on display is dazzling. So detailed accounts of Vijayanagar, of the Dussehra festival, Mahanavami festival. Any of you is interested, you can even read it online because their accounts are available on the net. Now, we know that the Vijayanagar Empire was vanquished in the famous Battle of Talikota against the Bahmani Sultanates. And soon after the desecration, there is a foreigner. His name is an Italian, and his name is Cesare Frederici. He comes to Vijayanagar soon after the Battle of Talikota, and he writes an account of the city that has been ravaged for 6 months by the invading armies. So his is a very graphic account of the devastation that was wrought on the Vijayanagar Empire after it was defeated in the Battle of Talikota. He describes Hampi, how it is just, looted, ravaged. So these are some of the accounts that are there. In the north, coming back, there were very many travelers who have written detailed accounts which have survived and which we use to reconstruct or help to reconstruct. You've all heard of the French travelers, Bernier. You've heard of Tavernier. He was a jeweler and he used to, sell jewels to the royalty. And there is an Italian, Manucci. Manucci came to India when he was 17 years old. And actually, he even died in India. He lived here for many decades. And he wrote a 3-volume account of the Mughal Empire. And it's a very comprehensive account of the reigns of Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb. And interestingly, Manucci met the great Maratha leader, Shivaji, several times. And he's described that also in his account. I just want to mention one Englishman, John Fryer. he had come uh, to India uh, wanting some trade concessions from Shivaji, because Shivaji controlled Surat and the adjoining areas. So he met Shivaji and said that, me and my group, we were requesting for some trade concessions. And Shivaji says that my coronation is going to be held very soon at Raigad. So why don't you come attend the coronation and we can discuss things over there. So John Fryer presents an eyewitness account of the coronation of Shivaji at Raigad. And he describes his stay at Raigad, and he says it is very, very astonishing and surprising that the king and everyone has the same food. No separate food is cooked for the king. They all eat. King means Shivaji, and they all eat an Indian dish which he describes as khichdi. So this is the inside view that we get of Shivaji's court, how there was no distinction between the food that was served to the ruler and the ordinary soldiers at his court. And they said that, this eating khichdi, after 2 days we fell ill, and we told Shivaji that, we're not used to this diet and we need eggs and chicken, and how his men searched for a butcher in the adjoining villages and finally came across one, and they brought him to Raigad so that he could provide these Englishmen with eggs and chicken. It's a very interesting account. And there is another account by Abbe Carey that I want to discuss with you. Abbe Carey was wanting to travel from Goa to another city, which would take him 3 weeks to reach. And at that time, it was the normal thing that you hire coolies who will carry your baggage from one place to another. And he describes the life of these coolies because he sees it firsthand. He says, at the start of the journey, I had agreed that I would pay them this amount. It was a pittance. But his account is valuable because he says that the coolies, they tried not to spend even 1 penny of what I gave them, and their attempt was to save every penny of it and take it back for their family. So this commitment to the family, it is something really very heartwarming. He said they would leave, when they left home, they would try to take dry provisions for 3 weeks. And at every village that we stopped, it was a custom that rice water would be offered to the visitors at the entry point. So that rice water, which is supposed to be very nutritious, it sustained them, and tobacco, because tobacco reduces that sense of fatigue. And so they said they were heavily using tobacco and rice water and whatever dry rations they carried. So imagine, this is a real eye-opener for this person. Now, given that I have, how many minutes do I have? 10 minutes or less?
Ma'am, you can have 10 more minutes. It's not a problem.
Okay, so I will just briefly come to the colonial period. Now, because the time is very little, I will only talk about the entry of the British. I cannot get into the European companies, the other companies. We all know that around 1600, trading companies were set up in many countries of Europe. So the English East India Trading Company was one such company. Now, the early Englishmen who came to India, they were very clear that they have come only to make money. They were not coming with any attempt or intention to impose their way of thinking on India. So the early accounts that we have of Englishmen in India is one of awe at what they see of Indian civilization. And they say that there is an enthusiasm for India an enthusiasm for Indian civilization in its most ancient times. And the first person who writes about this is John Gross. He writes in the mid 18th century, and he writes a book. He comes to India and he lives in India and he writes a book, A Voyage to the East Indies. And in that book, he says that the Hindus are so liberal in disposition in matters of faith. He says they are very rigid and strict about following their customs, but so tolerant of the customs of others. John Holwell, I want to mention him. He was briefly even governor of Bengal, and he's written several books which have survived. And he says that he described the inhabitants of India, I'm quoting, as from the earliest times, they have been an ornament to the creation, if so much can properly be said about any known people on the earth. So he says they have been an ornament to the creation. And there are so many accounts which I think I now will not get into. And the first Governor General of India, Governor General of Bengal rather, his name is Warren Hastings. And he was very passionately interested in Hindu religion and Hindu philosophy. And his contemporaries used to say that he enjoyed going Pandit hunting to Banaras. And William Ward, he writes in his journal that the Brahmins of the Kali Ghat temple told him that Warren Hastings used to go there every Sunday to worship the goddess. Now, Warren Hastings was the representative of a new kind of Englishman in India, and he believed that understanding Indian culture was very necessary. So he gathered around him a group of people like Charles Wilkins, Nathaniel Halhead, Jonathan Duncan, William Jones, and H.T. Holbrook, H.H. Wilson, and James Prince. They all made major contributions in the fields of Indian religion, philosophy, philology, archaeology, and history. William Jones translated the Kalidas's Shakuntala into English, and it went through 5 reprints in England in the first 2 decades of its publication. He translated the Geet Govind, and he said it's at par with Greek literature. And he was the first, he said that I cannot view the philosophy of Vedanta and the many fine compositions in it without believing that Pythagoras and Plato did not derive their knowledge from the sages of India. H.T. Colebrook, he said that civilization had its origins in Asia. H.H. Wilson, I can just go on. There was a very important Scottish philosophical historian, William Robertson. He says that the Indians had made great progress in civilization at a very early period. I don't want to get into that. I want to conclude by India's contribution in the realm of science. It was readily acknowledged in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine in particular. Indians were remarkably advanced well before the commencement of the Common Era. And one admirer declared, I'm quoting, the Asiatics had climbed the heights of science before the Greeks had learned their alphabet. Just 2 more points. In 1777, Sir Robert Barker presented a paper at the Royal Asiatic Society when he said the signs of the zodiac must have originated from them. And then John Playfair, professor of mathematics at Edinburgh University, he presented a paper, Remarks on the Astronomy of the Brahmins, in which he also paid great tributes to the scientific achievements of the Indians. I'll conclude by saying that why did the tables turn? Why were people who were so full of appreciation of India suddenly turn hostile? There were certain reasons for this. First was the rise of the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, and the military victories that the British won in India. The military victories of the British by the early 19th century, they knew that they are finally going to be the rulers of this country. This military strength combined with the scientific and technological achievements that were made in England and in Europe turned the tide against India, and it gave birth to the theory of the white man's burden, that the white man has not come to India to learn but to civilize the natives. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meenakshi Jain ji. It was an enlightening lecture. Now, with your permission, can we take few questions from the live comment sections?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, ma'am. One of our volunteers, Rajas ji, has sorted the questions down and he will now raise the questions. Over to you, Rajas ji.
Namaste, ma'am.
Namaste.
It was a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
And we got to know a lot of interesting things.
Thank you.
We have a few questions asked by the members of the Vande Mataram team and by the viewers in the live chat.
Yes.
The first question is, ma'am, you have mentioned in your books that accounts of Sati mentioned by some of the travelers were second-hand or fabricated.
Yes.
How do we differentiate between who was right and who was wrong?
Now,
and do you find any other accounts or events being fabricated or misunderstood by our travelers?
Now, I want to answer this question. Give me a little time because it's a very, very important question. The first eyewitness account that we have of Sati is, as I told you, at the time of Alexander. When Alexander was returning home, then there is an instance of Sati which is recorded, the genuine incident. After that, the next evidence that we have of Sati is 800 years later. It is an inscription. It is called the Iran inscription. It is still, you can find it. After that, the next, there are very few eyewitness accounts. All right, Ibn Battuta mentions 3. Those are genuine instances. Now, what happens that after the new route to India is discovered by Vasco da Gama, we have many travelers coming from Europe. And this is the time when, they're catering to the home audiences and they want to write things that they think will sell at home and which will make them famous. So Sati is one practice that they think will be a sensational practice and will, get them readers. So why do I say it is copied? Because, first of all, the accounts are almost in the same language. There is no difference in the wording. And they don't record which part of India that instance is from. So you can say, Sati was there, but where? In north, south, east, west, you have to give a time frame, you have to give a setting. And they use the same language. So it is very clear. You can make out when you read the accounts, you can make out which is an eyewitness account and which is just copy. And this plagiarism was very rampant in this period, especially about Sati, because they were not writing for an Indian audience. They were writing for an audience back home, which wanted to hear about exotic practices in India.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Shashank Shekharji.
Yes.
As you mentioned in one of your talks, that the deity present at Raja Ka Mahal temple in Datia, Madhya Pradesh, is the original Ram Lalla deity. So would you like to tell us more about that, and will it be consecrated in the new Ram Janmabhoomi temple?
See, there is a lot of debate about what happened to the image of Lord Ram at the Ram temple. There are conflicting accounts. One is by the Orcha royal family. And the Orcha royal family traditions, I've met the ruler of Orcha and present ruler, and he has confirmed there is a strong tradition in that family that the queen, she said, I will go to Ayodhya and take darshan of Lord Ram. This in the medieval period. She came to Ayodhya. She said she wanted an image of Lord Ram. She could not find an image. Naturally, in that period, where would she find an image? So she decided that since she has failed in her mission, she will do samadhi in the Saryu river. So when she entered the Saryu river, her foot touched something and she called out to her attendants to see what is it. And they pulled out an image of Ram. That image of Ram, she brought back from Ayodhya to her kingdom where it is still being worshipped. Now the problem with that image is that it is an image of Ram as king. It is the Raja, whereas we are looking for an image of Ram Lalla. Then what happens is that in the early 20th century, that is in 1901, an image of Ram Lalla is found when the Saryu Nadi river changes its course. When the river changes its course, this image is found. And this image is worshipped in a temple in Ayodhya till today.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Arkesh Venkatji. He has asked what were the Sanskrit names of Indian philosophers and were they the Naga sadhus?
No, they were Indian philosophers. Why should they be Naga sadhus? There were so many of them. Virtually every part of India had a Sanskrit philosopher. I cannot list them, but why should they be Naga sadhus? Naga sadhus was a separate stream.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll move on to the next question then. The next question is from Shivakumarji. He has asked if there is a gap in interpreting historical incidents between archaeologists and historians.
Actually, there is now a great similarity in the conclusions that archaeologists are presenting and what historians are saying. This is particularly true of the early period, it's very true of the Indus Valley civilization. And I think that you cannot present a complete historical account until you give adequate space to the findings of archaeologists. Because I'm talking about, for example, Krishna worship. Now, unless we had not got the accounts of archaeologists who excavated at the site of the Heliodorus column, we would not have known so much. So archaeology plays a very, very important role in substantiating what historians believe or don't believe.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next question is from Dikshit Jainji. He has asked, what do foreign travelers say about temples at Ayodhya, Kashi Vishwanath Temple and Mathura Govinda Temple?
Wonderful question. I'm so glad that this question has been asked. I'll answer first on Ayodhya. The first account that we have of an Englishman at Ayodhya, it is by a person called William Finch. And William Finch goes to that site and he writes that this is the Ram court, Ram's castle, and people come, they come in large numbers and they take a dip in the Saryu river, and then there are Brahmins nearby who write their names and they take back black burnt rice from here when they go back home. This is the first eyewitness account that we have of Ayodhya by a person called William Finch. After that, the next account is by a Jesuit father, an Austrian father. His name is Joseph Tiffentheller. Joseph Tiffentheller lived in India for almost 4 decades, and he visited the Awadh region and traveled in that region for at least 7-8 years. And his book has survived. And in that book, it's very important because Joseph Tiffentheller is the first person to tell us that the Hindus have created a Vedi. Vedi is Bedi or cradle. He said they have created a cradle at this site, and cradle is for a newborn. So he says they have created a Vedi at this site, and they come in huge numbers, particularly at the time of Ram Navami, and they circumambulate the cradle and they offer prayers over here. So these are the two earliest eyewitness accounts by foreigners, one by an Englishman and the other by a Jesuit father. After that, there are numerous accounts, mainly of British administrators, but these are the most significant earliest accounts. Then you asked about Kashi. The next.
Yes, ma'am, Kashi.
Okay. Now Kashi, we have the history of Kashi. It was destroyed, built, rebuilt, and we have the account that was prepared by Tavernier. Before the destruction of the Kashi Vishwanath temple, we have the account of Tavernier and Bernier. They write in detail about the temple, and these are the last two eyewitness accounts we have of the temple of Kashi before its destruction in 1669. The destruction of the Kashi temple actually begins in the late 12th century. The first destruction is by Qutubuddin Aibak. The temple is rebuilt on a smaller scale, destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed. And then we have this account by the two travelers. And what was the third? Ayodhya, Kashi and?
Mathura temple, Mathura Govinda temple.
Yeah. So the Mathura temple also, we have foreign accounts of the first account we have is of a Jesuit priest, and he is staying at the court of Akbar, and he says that, I went to Mathura, and all the temples are in ruins in Mathura except one temple which is a Krishna temple, and that is the only temple that is standing in Mathura. So this is the first foreign account that we have of Mathura by Father Montserrat.
Our next question is from Srinivas Chakravarti ji. He has asked, the accounts of foreigners about India over nearly 2000 years by and large seem to be very much positive.
Yes.
But when and why did we become weak to be invaded, dominated, and colonized by the foreign powers?
No, this is I don't know how to answer this question, because even after we were invaded, we were getting very, very positive accounts written of this country, because they did not evaluate this country on terms of who's ruling, who's not. They came to study Indian culture, Indian civilization. So as I told you, that in the ancient period, we had Indo-Greeks, Kushans, Shakas. They invaded, but people wrote very positively about India. In the early medieval period, the Arabs wrote very positively about India. Al-Biruni wrote very positively about India, though he knew that Mahmud Ghaznavi had, attacked India and devastated such important cultural sites. The thing is that after Al-Biruni, the Persian historians are not interested in Indian culture and civilization. So they don't write about it, barring a few like maybe Abul Fazl. They are interested only in the king, the sultan, and the court around him. In the British period, in the colonial period, the early phase of the entry of foreigners, when they were not the dominant power, they were very, very appreciative of the ancient civilization of India. It is when they capture political power. They cannot say that India is so great. Then what are you doing here if India is so great? So that is when they have to downplay Indian achievements, and they say it is backward, it is caste ridden, it is against, it is exploiting, and that is why we have come, because we have to uplift the people of this country.
Thank you, ma'am. Due to time constraints, this will be our last question. Sorry to the other viewers who had asked questions and wanted a response from the ma'am. Our last question is from our faculty. Professor Thamban Nairji is from the Department of Mathematics. He has asked, one of the questions is very important, that is, why no account of Indian history by any Indian is there?
I didn't understand the question.
He has asked, why no account of Indian history by any Indian is there?
But Indian historians have written on India. I mean, if he's asking in the ancient period, in the medieval period, so we have accounts like Raj Tarangini.
Okay, I think perhaps the question must be like why there are less accounts of Indians writing the Indian history.
In the ancient and medieval period, just
yes, I guess.
So we have accounts like Raj Tarangini. There now we are coming across more and more accounts which are being translated into English so that they are accessible. And when we are looking at these accounts, we have quite a few actually. We have actually quite a few accounts. It's only that we are becoming familiar with them now, as we are looking for more and more sources to enrich the historical narrative. We're looking for more sources and we are coming across these accounts. So they are there, but not so well known, perhaps.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am, for answering our questions. Now I request Ankush ji to deliver the vote of thanks.
Namaste everyone. I, Ankush Kumar Mishra, on behalf of Vande Mataram family, would like to express sincere gratitude to Dr. Meenakshi Jain ji for this wonderful talk. I would like to specifically mention that Professor Mitchell Darino ji gave our second annual Sri Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay Memorial Lecture. He commented on our YouTube channel regarding this lecture, and I quote him, "Excellent lecture by Dr. Meenakshi Jain. With her usual rigor and meticulously marshaled evidence, she brings out the concept of India clearly to the eyes of those early travelers to India." I guess the comment resonates with all the viewers. I would like to thank our faculty advisor, Professor Ramashankar Verma, IIT Madras management, our student volunteers, and alumni of IIT Madras family for unconditional love and support that they have been giving us for the last 5 years. Thank you.
Can I thank all of you very profusely for this honor and privilege? Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. It's our privilege to have you in our platform, in our comprehensive Chattopadhyay lecture.
I hope it was worth your effort.
Of course, ma'am, it was a great pleasure. We got to know a lot of things about, this is a very long timeline and we got to know many things.
Thank you so much again.
Now I request Sudha Jain ji to conclude this session with National Anthem. Sudha Jain ji.
हाँ जी। जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे, भारत भाग्य विधाता, पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंग, विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा, उच्छल जलधि तरंग, तब शुभ नामे जागे, तब शुभ आशीष मांगे, गाहे तब जय गाथा, जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता। जय हे जय हे जय हे, जय 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 हे।
Thank you, Sudha Jain ji. Now I thank you, ma'am. We are grateful to you for coming to our platform and connecting with us live. And it's a great pleasure for us to host you.
Thank you so much.
I thank all the audience for joining us in YouTube live, and we hope to see you all in our next event very soon. Those who are interested to volunteer and receive updates regarding further events, please email us at vandemataram@smail.iitm.ac.in. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we close now the meeting?